afternoon, my name's Andrew Belletti and I'm still in Darwin, and today I'm talking with Colin Simpson, who is an audio handyman. He's a sound mixer. He's a extraordinarily talented guitarist. He designs PA systems, and he's pretty much the go-to technical, like a real proper schooled audio technical person in Darwin. G'day, Colin.
G'day, Andy.
What do you think, if I was to ask you what your thing was at the moment, and I know what you've done over the past, but how would you describe yourself at the moment?
Well, I'm a happy all-rounder. I will do some gigs, maybe in Darwin, in a local club like Kedss or the Railway Club. I like independent bands. I've got a lot of experience with independent bands, Indigenous musicians. It's great. That's a part of what I do, travel out to communities to work on festivals, music festivals and so forth, and workshops. And in Darwin, as a backstop, I guess, I repair electronic equipment, audio things, guitars, amplifiers, sometimes microphones, make leads, all that sort of stuff. And I've also done a few recordings, but not too many lately.
So tell me, before you got to Darwin, what was happening, and what, this kind of sound system community, this drive that you've got for doing community stuff and stuff that doesn't fit the mould, where does that come from?
I left sort of cold, depressing Melbourne in 1979 to go to Perth, which was sunny and everybody seemed to be happier. But to get work, the easiest way to get work was to take PA systems and bands around the regional areas. And the idea being that after you'd done that for a year or two, you could start breaking into the city circuit. But I enjoyed travelling around regional places and country towns and stuff so much that I never really got serious about the city. And one of the early things I remember is they used to have moon dances on the full moon down in places like Albany and Denmark in the southwest of Western Australia. So we'd turn up in a van with a small PA and some lights, and take all comers. Any bands in the district, any musicians could just get up, and there would probably be a headlining band coming down from somewhere. But the spirit of it was we'd make our own entertainment. The bands would make their own entertainment. We would do things at a really low price and just for the enjoyment as much as for the money, and then we'd move on and do something else. But so after a few of those, I lived in Albany for a while. There was a surprisingly good scene. There was a great folk club down there. The Waifs eventually came out of that folk club. Ross Ryan, who's a real old-time legend from the 70s, came out of that Albany folk club. Fantastic little music scene down there, a pub rock scene, these moon dances, and plenty of opportunities to just pack up the van and travel. So that gave me my taste. So we went everywhere, all the way up to Broome eventually. I did that for about 4.5 or 5 years. And after which I went back to Melbourne. Again, the scene over there in the early to mid-80s was, I was a bit restless after all the country, and I wanted to go bush again. So I came back to Darwin to have a look around, and then look around the NT, and I liked it. So I've pretty much been here ever since the mid-80s when I first met you.
And before that, because when I first met you, you used to talk a lot about Jamaica. So how does that fit into things?
Well, I've always loved reggae music, and I was a big fan of Bob Marley and the Wailers. I had worked on a Peter Tosh gig in Perth in 1980, which was great. And I had it in the back of my mind I'd like to go to Jamaica. I didn't actually pull that off until 1991. and my partner and I had got to go. We were pretty excited. We'd been saving up for a long time to go, and we got to go over there for the summer festival season, and which was fantastic. We loved the PA systems over there. Every little place that had music would have an interesting homemade PA. The big festivals had big professional PAs, but they had that spirit of doing it themselves.
Okay, so we need to go back to when you first got to Darwin then.
Yeah.
So back to because I think that was kind of the first part of the 80s, so maybe 84 or something.
84.
That I first...
Yeah. And in the context of us making our own entertainment and our own gigs and that's one of the things that attracted me to you guys, to the Swamp Jockeys. That you had a great we're going to do it, we can do it ourselves attitude, which I found a bit lacking in the bigger music scenes. Melbourne, Sydney, Perth were getting very specialised, and so we put on a lot of gigs, as you know, sometimes under people's houses or in their living rooms with whatever gear we could put together, and some really excellent gigs at the uni, which I don't think have ever been equalled or surpassed. The vibe in the mid to late 80s out there, they were ready for it, and we came and did it. We had great gigs at the uni. We didn't have huge PAs, but we had enough gear, and heaps of people used to come and like it. And I think that launched quite a few bands out there. My band at the time, your band at the time, were regulars, and lots of other musicians surely came along and got a buzz out of it too.
Yeah, and I think what was really interesting about the stuff that we were doing was it was not part of the conventional network. So
yes.
And I know when and this is out of a couple of factors. One is, environment. So, indoor kind of pubs were, they had their clientele, they wanted to preserve their clientele, and if they had a band, because of the air-conditioned pub vibe, they wanted it to be, like something that was on topic. So they wanted it to be a cover band. And in those days, we were pretty much playing almost 90-something% original material.
Yeah.
And as you guys were and a whole bunch of other bands were, this burgeoning early 80s kind of original scene, but we had nowhere to play because the venues did not want to know about us.
That's right. Yeah.
And that was, and by necessity, we were forced into unconventional venues like Scout Halls, Greek Halls.
Yes.
The uni where we commandeered a demountable, but the band couldn't fit inside, so we had a makeshift stage outside. So again, outside sound systems, the rooftop of the workers, the rooftops, basketball courts, outdoor areas were predominantly where we could play, and unorganised or part of not part of the organised music sector. So we existed outside of that, which is, I think, what made it interesting and challenging.
Oh, yeah.
And when you jumped from stage and put your guitar down and then jumped behind the mixing console, which you did with alarming regularity, suddenly Simo's gone and then he just appears behind the mixer and he's like, but yeah, so you mixed and played constantly. There was that kind of interchange between the two roles. But there was all those challenges of, you're fighting the environment at times. The cicadas were louder than the guitars, You're fighting an environment that's kind of, oppressively hot. Yeah. The equipment's blowing up. It's overheating is an understatement. But, that type of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It's true. And you're right, because it would have been much easier to just play the covers and make the money, but none of us wanted to do that. So yeah, and exactly as you say, so sweaty, horrible sounding, resonant tin sheds with hard floors, sound man's nightmare. Somehow we had fun. Somehow the audience had fun. We did all that. We did car parks standing on hay bales, if you remember, more than once. Yeah. Yeah, it's true, we did. And under people's houses, but one of my favourites is in somebody's lounge room with so many people in an upstairs house that the house looked like it was shaking so much it was going to come off its piers. And I thought, I'm never going to see this anywhere else in the world. So yeah, Darwin was a buzz. It was great.
The idea of one of the activities before sound check was to swing by Delaney's and pick up some hay bales. Like Delaney's was the produce and livestock store in town. Yeah. We used to have to go by and get a dozen or 18 hay bales for whatever, to put under the boards on the stage or for people to sit on or to prop up amps or whatever it was. But hay bales seemed to be part of the staging that we did. But yeah, I think those challenges are what made that whole scene really kind of vital and really interesting. And, the fact that we would just randomly get together to kind of print posters and publicise things through word of mouth. Yeah. And again, it has a lot of tie-ins with these kind of grassroots kind of activism stuff. I remember we played, for East Timor, we played for the unions, we played for, obviously Aboriginal bands in those days, just bringing Aboriginal bands that we knew on stage was an activist
it was
thing, because it was just not done at all. Yeah. And the pubs or the venues or wherever we were, we'd often have to lie about our true intention. Oh no, the people who own the Greek Hall, we just blatantly told lies before we staged probably one of the most memorable gigs in Darwin. I think we almost... Yeah, the floor almost gave away there as well. Yep,
and we could name drop, but really, if you're talking about putting on people like Coloured Stone, which we did, and the Rumpy Band, and it's amazing to think now because they're such legends, but at that time, they really couldn't get a gig in Darwin pubs.
Yeah, even the Mill Sisters, Soft Sands. When we had shows, we would always look for who can be given a hand up onto the stage to perform. And Tiwi Whalers over at the grand final. There was always, and again, that was, to me, that felt like kind of the natural thing to do because that's what we wanted to do. But in hindsight, it was activism. It was like, what are you guys doing? Yeah. And a lot of the time, when you did it, as a clandestine activity, you kind of got people in. Because don't forget, in those days, especially in Darwin, I know a lot of Aboriginal people felt very uncomfortable in venues because the people would be trying to kick them out, and that was the sad fact of the day. So, like getting people up on stage in those venues, either organised or disorganised.
It was very rare, and it did feel like this is different for Darwin. People would look at you in surprise, like you got Aboriginal band on stage. Like that's people in those days in Darwin. It really was iconoclastic. It was sort of like everyone had their little scene. And it was all locked up.
But I think that's what made it so exciting, and that's what made us so motivated to do stuff.
Yeah, and for me personally, it was so much more interesting and exciting to do that, given my other background. Before I got to Darwin, it was just totally natural for me to join that. I wasn't going to get stuck in a pub and grow mould, in the corner as a mixer in a pub. It was just so exciting and so much more interesting. And
you provided basically essential services for a lot of bands as well. So apart from all the rest of it, I always remember your ability to repair guitars that various bands have, in the middle of a performance or straight after the performance, the guitar turns up or the amp turns up on your doorstep with a note. Yes. Broke the headstock. Yes. This overheated, makes funny spitting sound now, and we need it for the gig tomorrow night. So you'd be there, whatever time of day or night, repairing stuff for bands across the spectrum.
Yeah, that's right. And at the time, it's just what you did because it needed to be done, and it came in really useful when I started going to Arnhem Land regularly because there's always a pile of broken gear out there, and it's fantastic because it means the show can happen, and all of a sudden you've got more than enough guitars and amps instead of none or hardly any. Yeah. So, but and the same in Darwin. I mean, for the local musicians as well, it made no difference to me that if it was broken, I'd try and fix it, and my track record was pretty good. I managed to fix a lot of stuff.
I think you're underestimating. you have the technical skills to glue guitar headstocks back together, you know what I mean, to fix amplifiers that have been destroyed. I mean, that's not a it's not a kind of an average skill. This is
I'm definitely a handyman.
So so that part of, you know, that real kind of hands-on repair, getting stuff together, helping keep bands on the road. I think that is a huge part of the scene as well.
It's I agree. It is not only from necessity, but from my point of view, I actually found it exciting because the range of skills that I had, I could use them all, and I felt it just made me feel like this is the right place that I should be. So, as I said, when I came from Melbourne, Sydney, and then Perth, they were getting very specialised. So if you were like the solder monkey, you'd spend most of your days repairing electronic equipment. But in the NT, across the NT, and in the bush, in other states, I suppose, but I could do all those things. I could be fixing amplifiers, getting PAs together or getting them working or repairing them, guitars, restringing them, putting new electronics, controls, jacks in them, whatever, straightening bent necks, all that. So this range of skills really made for an interesting life. Like I had 25 or 30 fantastic years where everything, there was never run out of things to do. And you never knew what was going to happen next week or even tomorrow sometimes.
And I also remember the necessity, because at the time, you know, we were kind of doing stuff that didn't have much money or didn't have any official support. And I know, especially the very first Yothu gigs, I mean, they were part of Swamp Jockey gigs, and there was no money, there was no support, there was no grants, there was no ability to do anything. So we had to kind of do all sorts of jiggery pokery even to get stuff happening. But you know, that also led to these great opportunities. But one of the things was purely with a PA system. And I remember at the time there was one, let's call it a corporate hire facility in Darwin, and that, you know, they used to kind of hire out to PAs to houses of worship, which were kind of very big at the time. There was the Foursquare Church that probably had, you know, most of the kit on hire, the lights and sound. They had lots of people there, lots of money each week. And they did corporate events, and, you know, the pubs that had the money, they did the PAs for that. So when it came to us, they literally used to laugh in our face and say, so you want what? And you're going to drive down to where? So you need it for 2 weeks, but you've only got like $300? And they would just laugh in our face. So, you know, we had not only you, but we also had a guy called Blair Lade, who's...
Oh, yeah, he's a true legend.
Yeah, and his PA was kind of... I mean, I might say it was do-it-yourself. It was a decent PA, but it came with...
And he was a great operator. He was also a great technician, and his prices were affordable. And I think he scared the big guys sometimes because he was prepared to put himself out and do that stuff, help out bands like us, He
used to drive down to wherever it was, you know, and sleep in his swag or in the front cab of the... and roll out this PA that often needed repairs on the road. And then when I got a chance to do a gig with him, I always enjoyed it, always learnt something. He's a really knowledgeable person. To me, he's probably the best audio tech I've ever met in the NT. He hasn't been in our field for a while because he decided to go off and do other things in electronics, which he's more than capable of
making rocket guidance systems or something. He's that good at electronics. But while he was in the game, while he was in the PA and production game in Darwin, it was just absolute joy to work with. And it was a golden time for us because we could put on larger events and he had enough quality PA gear to do it. Whereas if we had to go to the major production company, they would have charged 5 times as much or more. And so we could put on shows to 2,000 people or whatever at a price we could afford there. So maximum respect to Blair Lade.
And the show always went on, so no matter what happened with the unregulated, generator power supply, or if the generator itself crapped out during the afternoon or evening, because don't forget some of the heat and humidity and dust that we had to endure. So if something like that, if the power source itself went down, or if part of the PA went down, Blair would be out the back of the truck and he's got his soldering iron and his meters and he's getting it working. And so with Blair, the show always went on. And I don't know who would roll out electronic gear to that extent on a basketball court or under a mango tree in the dirt or on a beach or wherever we used to make him go to. It was quite extraordinary. It was next level effort, and he did grumble, but he always delivered, and he loved it. It was a kind of, he used to grumble a little bit, but at the end of the day, he'd go, that was just awesome.
He'd do it. He'd always do it. He was definitely a mentor to me because we were there to keep going, and when we did go out bush, we would do pretty much what Blair did. He set the mould. He was a pioneer of putting on quality production in the bush at a price that people could afford. So whoever's putting on the gig might be a community, might be a group of bands, there might be some government money involved for a festival, but that's what we tried to do. And Blair set the bar for that. He was so good at it.
And no, the idea of having a stage or a carpeted auditorium or air conditioning was not even on the radar, really, was it?
So we did a lot of gigs with the performers just standing at one end of basketball court, and the people at various distances from the stage, usually the kids would come in first and start dancing. The bands, one of the bands or the other would pick up the challenge and play Wipeout or something like that, and the kids would go crazy. After dark, an hour after dark, people would start moving in, and then older people would start dancing, teenagers and that. So many times those basketball gigs were just pure magic because it would be full of happy people. They didn't care at all, There's we gave them a PA that sounded good, I hope. We gave them bands they liked, and that was all they were asking. And after that, everyone had a great time.
And I often think about that idea that, being on, because traditionally when you perform, you're on a stage, so you're elevated, and then the PA is elevated above that, so you're kind of looking up, and it's kind of a bit of reverence or whatever. It's it's a kind of a, it's a theatrical trope or whatever. I mean, it's the idea of the stage. So when you're on the same level, and often when you're on the dirt or on just a piece of concrete, everybody's on the same level. They're all access gigs. That's the other thing. There was never gates, never security, never fences. It was come one, come all. Sometimes in Darwin when we did gigs, we would, we'd have somebody kind of standing around the door to make a few dollars for whatever we were doing. But generally it was an all access type situation. And once, because often we would be, involved in the bands and the setup and all that. So by 10 or 11 o'clock, we're finished, exhausted. And then the PA would be still there, and it would be left to, at the time, Blair's tape or somebody else's mix tape of whatever dance music for the kid. And then all the kids would come out and just dance and dance and dance till the PA was packed up at 1 a.m. or whatever. So those kind of informal discos, from the early to mid 80s, now are a really big thing. Like if you go to Barunga now, they have discos after the bands that start at 11 o'clock, and all the kids sleep during the rock and roll, and they come out at 11 and dance till 3. But in those days, it was just somebody would put on a mixtape and just leave the PA set up for a few more hours. And that was kind of informal. But I think that literally a level playing field that we played on and set up on and all that. No staging, no fancy.
Yeah.
It was accessible, and people could see what we were doing.
Yeah.
There was no barrier between the performers and the PA and the audience.
No, that's true. And at modern Barunga, of course, they got much better production, and of course it's lovely to hear that great sound, and they can have a much bigger audience in front of the PA now. I've been there and there's 5,000 people recently, 5,000 people on Friday or Saturday night, so they need a bigger PA system. But back in the day when we started it, I was at the first 3 Barungas, and there was very little money for PA and lights, so I can tell you that. And I remember your band, Swamp Jockeys, being, I think, at the first or the second one. Pardon my memory. But and we were doing that on the Smell of an Oily Rag as well, And at the 88 Barunga, when the Prime Minister came and talked about a treaty, that was done on the football field on the Arts Council PA, which the Arts Council had, and that channel Yamaha powered desk, 4 Bose speakers on poles, and the Arts Council had loaned it as a form of sponsorship to the festival, and that's what everybody heard.
Everybody had to. It was such a small little PA. Everybody had to gather around and.
Well, they had to stay quiet to hear anything at all. And the African dance troupe had just been on.
That's right.
Yeah. So, yeah, that was good. And that's the other aspect of my job that I love, because I've been in places where there's clearly history in the making, And the song treaty came from that promise at Barunga in June 88. But just being in that time in that place, and then it felt like it was important, You could feel the electricity in the air. And every good gig, you're always going to feel electricity in the air. That's what mixers live for. That's the reason, I suppose, that could be the difference between people that really love live sound and people that love recorded sound. And I'm not knocking people that love recording. I've done a bit of it myself, but on a night where really good music, really good performers, and the crowd are into it, you get this electricity in the air that you can't really describe it. But and then that's, to me, that's a big part of why you do it. If you don't get that, do something else.
But I do remember sometimes you're talking about Barunga, but there was that gig, and there was a couple of other kind of festivals that were happening in the 80s, where a stage of some sort was needed because the crowds were a little bit bigger and it was all outdoors or whatever. But the stage often just ended up being the bogie of a flatbed of a truck.
Yeah. Did a few gigs on the back of trucks, didn't we? And hay bales, which you guys made famous. Standing on hay bales, at least one of your singers was usually barefoot, so he must have had good, tough feet. But, and, there's one thing I do like about even the more recent festivals in Arnhem when I see footage of them, is they still have that kept that tradition alive of they might be on the veranda, out in the school or whatever, just any nice little place where they can have a performance space. And that's to save the worry of having to bring in a big production and a big, come up with $25,000 or $30,000 to put on a festival. So I love it that they can have a great festival and lots of people play and lots of people come, and it's not a big deal. It's not, oh my God, where are we going to get $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, to have a PA company come out here with big stuff. So I'm not prejudiced against big gigs with big equipment, but it's great. I sort of feel like they're doing what we did when I see them up there with a small PA, and that's their festival, and they're loving it.
Yeah,
and rocking it.
And I think I just remember playing on the veranda of so many schools, but and then you're trying to get the power lead into the classroom after hours because it's locked and it's the weekend. So one of the kids comes over and goes, "Oh, no, jimmy those louvers and just to get the power lead in so you can fire things up. But I think the beautiful thing about informal gigs is that when you go into the community, no matter what that community is, they feel part of it. So when you're setting up, they're all around you. You're not locked away in a venue where you've got this kind of scientific, clinical kind of way of setting up and running leads and putting cable ramps down and testing it with tones and whatever. You're basically setting up and people are asking you questions over your shoulder. What's that? What are you doing with that? And when you go into community, you become part of the community, and then they sit on you and then they look at you.
And you're often asking people for help because you're saying, do you know, where have you got 2 PowerPoints nearby? Can you show me? Do you mind giving me a hand lifting this speaker? Just teenage young men or whatever. So there's that thing there because you're not taking that approach of you just sit over there and we'll call you when it's all ready. It's like everybody is going to be there, so you get involved.
To me it's the ultimate co-design because you don't go in there with a set idea of what the gig's going to be or the performance is going to be or even the music. Like we used to literally carry cassettes like, Run DMC or whatever in your pocket and, pop it in the while you're setting up the PA and you'd get feedback from the kids to park a bit later on, you'd be playing some of that. It was, you figured out what people wanted and you did it their way. I mean, in that way, even the music of the band we're talking about, the Swamp Jockeys, was kind of designed within... it spoke to it was not the best music on the planet, but it was interesting and it spoke to the environment. It was informed by the environment and it spoke to the audience that listened to it in a very real way,
I thought so. I actually liked it a lot, but I'm not going to praise you too much. But it was like nothing else in Darwin and it fit and you guys were just great. You were just like my favourite band. Pretty much from the first Swamp Jockey gig I ever saw, I thought, well, that's my favourite band in Darwin. And I had seen a lot of bands and worked with a lot of bands down south, and my feeling was you're as good as anybody. And history probably treat Swamp Jockeys fairly kindly, I hope. But to me, you were one of the big features of me deciding to live back in Darwin. I thought, this place is happening. I knew what was happening in Melbourne and Sydney and Perth for that matter and the country around Perth, but I decided to stay in the Territory. My family's here. My mum was sick at the time and it made it a pleasure. It really made it great to come back to the Territory and live up here. And so with the Swamp Jockeys, you're being very modest, but there's no point, being too modest. But the Swamp Jockeys, there were a few other unusual groups of musicians around at the time, and luckily our scene acted like a magnet, so we got to meet them all and work them all and figure out how we're going to put on gigs in scout halls or wherever it was. Occasionally you guys would arrange a gig in an actual pub or something, so we'd all have to go along and see how that went. Sometimes not so well, sometimes it went okay. So you were like trailblazers for us because we weren't the type of bands that underground, original, post-punk, whatever, psycho country, whatever we were doing. We weren't the type of bands that were going to get gigs in the pubs up here because it was 100% covers, as you said a while ago. So it made it really interesting, and it is really surprising now thinking back. I could list, if my memory's having a good day, I could list 30 bands easily in that era that were doing original music, and some of them only last a few weeks, and some bands would split up as they do and come back in with different people for another incarnation or trying a different approach. You or I played in probably 4 different variations of what was really one band. Just try something new, sing a new name, whatever, see what happens. A few new songs. So it's all part of the fun. And in a scene, in a way, Darwin, everyone says Perth is the most isolated capital city in the world. But if you accept that Darwin is a capital city, in other ways I think we're more isolated than them. But if you regard if you're not troubled by what happens out bush and in the small towns and regions, it's not a problem because there's always exciting stuff going on out there. And so every time I've been to, like, you know, Largermanu or Kalkaringi or Timber Creek or Barunga or Beswick or whatever, there's always something happening, yeah. And the grapevine works pretty well. So if there's a new band in one of those places, you're going to hear about it sooner or later. And even in my situation, the last few years, had a few serious health scares. Pretty much in good shape now, but I step back and let the younger guys take over all that grunt work. I can't work 27-hour days anymore. And so I know there's some great young people out in the bush because we had a good course at uni for a while there, and we trained some absolute wonderful people. So I know that legacy, if you want to look at it that way, of having really good people doing gigs in bush, Arnhem Land, regional towns. I know we've got people that are doing that now.
I think the other thing that I always think about is that when I was, you know, in Sydney and Melbourne, especially I suppose in the 80s and 90s, where the bands or music scenes were very, you know, as you were saying, you know, there was the music scenes plural were very compartmentalized and everybody had their own thing. Whereas, you know, in Darwin, because we had this strange band that I don't think any of us actually had a great handle on. It was just kind of a bit bigger than us, but also it was really shaped by the audience. But our audience was who? It was just the most, like, we started getting, you know, I mean, we quickly outgrew the 400-500 seaters. We quickly grew to, you know, playing to, you know, 500 to 1,000 people in Darwin. And some of those people were bikers at a block. Some of those people were the yearly hospital party at Christmas.
That was a great gig, yeah.
The lawyers, the judges and lawyers down at the Trailer Boat Club.
The cricket club.
All the Unionists, the rooftop rage, where there was thousands of people, and, you know, the Timorese, the Aboriginal gigs we were putting on at the time, the anti-mining gigs. There were all these different communities. You got these kind of, you know, what at the time were hippies, and then we got lawyers, and we got doctors, and we got bikie. Just such a diverse range of community that supported this really ramshackled band. And, you know, and we somehow managed to keep them all happy. And I still don't understand how that used to happen. But, you know, and sometimes when you're staring at a sea of bikies and you're out in the middle of the bush in the middle of the night and it's pitch black out there, you kind of think, if this goes wrong,
that's right.
We might never leave. But, you know, and somehow the bikers loved us.
You guys, you just had this great vibe, this energy that you guys had. Someone once told me that doesn't matter what's in front of you in the way of an audience, the bands that are going to make it are the ones that just go, okay, it doesn't matter whether there's 5 people there and they're not interested, or whether there's 5,000 and they seem to know all the words to our songs. You still give a great gig. And I never saw your band, the Swamp Jockeys, bottle at once, no matter which audience you're in front of. The energy was always there. And as you'd, by that stage, you know, by the time I'd realised how diverse your audience reach was, I'd been a fan of yours for a long time, so I wasn't too surprised. But that's the key ingredient. That's what bands like Yothu India or whomever also had. And right from the first time I ever heard Yothu India, which was on the Arts Council PA under a palm tree near the Darwin High School, very basic, very simple, but they had this energy, and there's that 150% commitment. They knew what they wanted to do, and you, of course, were heavily involved with them, but I didn't know the younger guys at that point. And the first time I ever met them, they just popped up to us when we were doing a 3-band gig under a house, and they said, "Can we play?" And I said, "Why not?" And they just blew me away. And I'm not at all surprised that they've become Australian legends, because they had that ingredient right from the start. They just put it out there, just gave it everything. And 150% commitment.
So I want to just get into a little. It's not a sidetrack, but talk a little bit more about the uni, because I know at the early 80s I was enrolled at the university, and so was another founding member of Yothu, Stuart Kellaway. We were at the university at the time. We were trying to get the Swamp Jockeys off the ground. We were struggling with venues, and somebody helped us get access to this demountable building, this relocatable building, and we got in there, and then somebody said, if you do it every now and again, you can get a liquor license as a social club. So once a month or something, first of all, it was just the one gig. We kind of had an informal stage. I think Blair and everybody was involved, and I don't know how many bands, but a few bands were on that night. But then after a few months of this kind of happening, it started becoming this informal thing on the side of the swamp there at CDU, which it was the community college in those days, but now it's CDU. And it was this informal venue that I just remember on one gig, and I was just looking around, and there were people on the street outside who couldn't even get in. Yeah. The inside was packed, the outside was packed. They were all around the back of the stage. There was probably about 500 or 600 people there. Yeah. It's just extraordinary. And then that kept going. I mean, I know that I kind of, moved on and went to Sydney and started doing different stuff, but it became known as the Swamp, and it became a pretty decent venue.
Yeah, it was. And they had all sorts of gigs there, like some larger and some smaller. It ended up with 3 demountables in a U shape, and all the verandas of each of the 3 demountables would be packed, and the quadrangle in the middle would be packed. And yet down on a smaller night, just on a routine Thursday night, they might just have a duo in the corner. And in fact, one of my bands just were rung up at maybe lunchtime on a Friday saying, can you guys come and play tonight in the corner beside the pool tables with, very small PA. Couldn't get everyone in the band together. We just asked a couple of friends, and we just got up and played, 3 sets inside in the corner, looking at guys playing pool and the bar at the far end of the demountable, just because someone else had bailed out and we felt like doing it, and we got a few free beers. So yeah, it was fabulous. And that lasted right up until they decided to change to a big new venue above the gymnasium. Right. But the new venue didn't have the atmosphere because it was all brand new, squeaky clean. And I think the raggle-taggle the ring of demountables was a really friendly space. Yeah. There's a couple of trees to chill under. It was fabulous on a dry season night. You could sit on the veranda, sit inside in the sort of dodgy air conditioning, or sit out under the stars, or stand around talking or whatever. So yeah, it was basically a very inviting space, and very inviting people running it. The student union at that time were incredibly friendly and supportive of just about anything going. So we could have a performance poet there. I remember once they got up ostentatious up when he had a hit, and we had to sort of be his backing band. Not sure if you remember that one, but all sorts of stuff went on out there. And in a way, I see more of that now in the hip hop scene and the street art scene in Darwin than the music scene. The mainstream music scene has moved away from that, for better or for worse. Everyone likes good production and wants to make some money, but the front lines now have moved to a generally younger group of people, and the hip hop scene up here is amazing. It's way bigger than what you'd expect for such a little town, and so rap, hip hop, street art are all really big up here, and they're the people that, I think, who are doing closest to what we did back in the 80s, because they do it. They just take it out and do it in the park, at the skate park or wherever they get an opportunity.
I think that's, I don't want to give too much away, but I think when we first started the venue there at the community college, I mean, it wasn't really, without people's knowledge. I think a few people in the main university knew about it, but I think there was this the Top FM, the university or the community college radio station was in on it. The student union were in on it, but there was only a couple of people in that. But generally, the people that needed to be in on it weren't formally part of it. They just turned a blind eye. So there was like a building manager who just didn't ask too many questions.
That's right, yeah.
There was the security guard who used to come around at the start of the night, and I still remember that car, and somebody used to have a conversation or whatever went on, and the security guard would go off and he'd say, so what time are you finishing up? Oh, around 1 o'clock. I'll come back just after that to make sure everything's locked up.
Yeah.
And he would disappear. So a lot of the stuff happened, people were complicit, but they turned a blind eye. It's not as if we did anything bad.
No.
I mean,
And it's amazing, because now on a really big night, as you say, there might be 500 people there, and 3 bands maybe. But it's amazing considering we're pretty much looked after security ourselves. And I can't remember having one bad security incident in like 2 years, So, but I think in context, the hotels that did have covers, all the big hotels were firing at that time as well. Darwin was a post-Cyclone Tracy reconstruction boom, so everyone was kind of catered for, and they figured, I think the powers that be at the uni, they figured there was a little niche there for us, a group of people who didn't fit the mainstream, and I think that's a good thing. And in Darwin we've got a couple of small venues like Happy Yes still and Railway Club who still have that approach, like you don't fit the mainstream but we'll give you a go,
Can I just ask you to talk, just backtrack a little bit? So the informal venue of the Swamp was one thing, but then I wasn't around much after that, but the DMDC was kind of the next.
It was, yeah. The DMDC was a bit of a find, in the sense that there was an old building in the city which was just being used to store records for the police, I think. So cardboard boxes full of old obsolete records, and they really hadn't got around to putting them in proper archives because it was just easier to leave them there. But anyway, one of our dear friends or the other discovered this and started knocking on doors until someone finally gave in and said, well, okay, well, you can have a lease on the place, peppercorn lease on this 2-storey building, located on the edge of Darwin City. Not a particularly attractive building. It was just an old concrete 2-storey building, but it did have a great area out the back, which with a few working bees would turn into a grass area. A couple of the committee had green thumbs, and before you know it, it was a nice place with trees and stuff, and we called it the Petrochemical Love Club initially, but we needed an official name to put to the funding bodies and the government so we could get a peppercorn list, so we called it the Darwin Music Development Centre, or DMDC. So that ran from roughly 1990 to December 1995, and we did get involved in East Timorese politics for the last couple of years of its life, and that the government at the time didn't like it. They were not interested in having a place where strong political views against the Indonesian government, and et cetera, you can figure out the rest. So they started to clamp down on us, but we put on so many gigs there, large and small. Again, you might have a Monday night gig where that anybody could come and play, absolutely anybody, and you just one week you might get 5 people turn up, the next week you might get 50. Anything could happen there. So the DMDC had the old atmosphere back. It was very Darwin, very tropical night. Dry season, you could lie on the lawn and look at the stars, and the band would be under the covered way at the back of the building. So yeah, it was great. 5 years of that. So there's the thread. That's what kept us.
And that was fairly open access as well, too, wasn't it?
Very open access, yeah. There were, at least 2, sometimes 3 nights a week where there was no cover charge. So it was just like a jam mentality or a gathering of friends mentality. So it was a great place to try out your new ideas or your new band, and you might get a free beer or two. And then maybe on a Friday, 2 or 3 bands would plan a bigger gig and charge a $5 at the door. But I don't ever remember the door charge being more than $5. And we had some really big bands play there from various parts of the world, not just Australia and locally. Because it was kind of like a workers' paradise. We really tried to keep that as affordable as possible, and I think we succeeded.
What's the story with Happy Yes?
After Darwin Music Development Corporation, DMDC, Petrochemical Love Club, was shut down in December 1995, there's a bit of public outrage from the musical community, so the government agreed to fund a body called MIDI, which eventually morphed into Music NT. They were tasked with finding a performance venue for live original bands. Sadly, that hasn't happened all this time later, but somewhere along the way, around 10 years later, an inspirational fellow from Nhulunbuy called Chris Keogh was among our group of friends, and he was hunting for a venue probably from about the late 1990s. And in 2004, he found a place that he thought would make a good venue, and that was the original Happy Yes. But unfortunately, we only had 1 gig there, and because this had a burst sewer main, the landlord said, "Oh, look, this is really not suitable for a venue, and too many people, only 1 toilet, that type of thing." So then we went back, or Chris went back, and a small group of his other friends went back to looking for another place, and they found an old shop in Bennett Street and opened Happy Yes in there. That had a licence for 50 people. It was so small, and there was a bit of spillover into the empty car park at the back on gig nights, which was not strictly legal. So every now and again the licensing commission would give us a warning about that, because people would like to go out the back and enjoy the night air. But again, that was the backbone of the Darwin underground and indie scene, and that was a take all comers as well. So we welcomed rap, hip hop, right through to death metal and all points in between. We're just completely non-denominational, so any type of music was welcome there. And as long as you behaved yourself, because again, the bands would, the performers and their friends would be responsible for running the gigs. We didn't have any money for staff, and it was definitely like a community or type of run event. And then initially, by 2007, it had got big enough that the committee was starting to look for, which I wasn't on at that time, but the committee were worried about growth, and they decided to look for bigger premises, which they did for the next 2 years, and eventually they moved in with Brown's Mart, where they still are, in about 2010 from memory, and maybe early dry season of 2010. So that's been, still is, prides itself on being open to all comers.
I think that I'm definitely seeing that in contemporary Darwin, is that there is stuff happening, but the cost of participation generally, so the cost of going out, there's lots of fancy bars, there's lots of fancy kind of restaurants, cafes, whatever, but their next level of money that needs to change hands for you to participate in that type of life. And as far as entertainment goes, the same type of thing. That there is, a threshold to participate in that a lot of people in Darwin just don't seem to have, unless you have those jobs that are paying, very, very decent money.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. So too much aimed at people with good disposable income, and not enough for the rest. And for many of us, we just do not have that financial base.
Back to the open participation and community-driven, designed events.
I will say though, if you just look at it as a music industry, it is the statistics up here, for what it's worth, are phenomenal. The sheer amount of performers that we have up here doing some sort of gig or another for the size of our population is phenomenal. Right? And nobody probably has the answer to why that is, except arguably that Darwin's always been a more welcoming place. Certainly when I got back here in the mid-80s, it was much more welcoming than Melbourne or Sydney, where you sort of start looking for a manager from the time you get 10 songs together in the hope that you can break in and get a few gigs for free beers and, you know, on a waiting list for 6 months to get in and play fifth band on a 4-band line-up type of thing back in those days. So that welcoming atmosphere that Darwin had, I hope we haven't lost it completely, because that's what made the place magic in the beginning. We felt like we could make a go of it, you and I and all our friends and people we knew. We felt like it was worth having a go, you know, and we enjoyed ourselves. I'm here to tell you, you know, I didn't do it. I wouldn't have done it this long if I didn't enjoy it.
We're going to be working together on Knock 'em Down Sound System April 2024. Thanks so much for your time today, Colin. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you, Andrew.
That's it.